Have you ever met the connector? Well, he ponders, he helps, he creates, he writes, he speaks. He basically connects people and brings them together. I speak about Paul Solano of PS and All Marketing Group. At psandallmarketinggroup.com, you will receive an assembled group of Paul's contacts and connections that cross into many sectors of life. Please contact Paul Solano at 617-240-4130 or psandallmarketinggroup@gmail.com if you are in the market for a wide array of services. Again, please contact The Connector, Paul Solano at 617-240-4130 or psandallmarketinggroup@gmail.com with any questions. And now, here's Paul Solano, the host of Paul Ponders.
Welcome to Paul Ponders. My name is Paul Solano of PS and All Marketing Group, and I may be reached via email at paul@paulponders.com. Thank you for joining me for my foray into podcasting. It is great to be collaborating with my friend and associate Chalonzo Amos of PodPro Entertainment to bring you some fun, exciting, and informative podcasts. For many years, I've been referred to as the Connector, or in Greater Boston circles as the Connector. With psandallmarketinggroup.com, I've created a side gig to connect you and get things done. Please sit back and relax and listen to today's podcast. If you are driving or operating heavy machinery and just listening, then please just listen and stay focused on your task at hand. Thanks again for listening. Enjoy my ponderings. Let #Paul Ponders begin. Greetings, everyone. How is everyone doing in podcast land? It's Paul Solano back for another episode. I will tell you that I am having a lot of fun doing this. I want to thank you all for stopping me in the streets, stopping me at Pearl Street Station, just saying, Paul, you're doing a great job. You have such wonderful guests. I want to thank you for rating me, for reviewing me, subscribing to #Paul Ponders through PS and All Marketing Group, part of the PodPro Entertainment Network with Techie Chalonzo in the control booth. Just doing a fabulous job. #indeed. So, we have a wonderful program, a wonderful podcast for tonight. And it's something that I'm really honored to have our three guests on tonight. I would like to introduce one of our guests, and his name is Scott Prusak from Untold Patriots Stories. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Paul, and it's a pleasure to be on with you and done a couple of live podcasts from your restaurant down there, Pearl Street Station, and look forward to doing some more. We all started this, me and Bob started this in July. It was born out of myself and Bob being big Pats fans, and of course, Bob's the stat man, the official historian of the Pats, and we became close friends. It's been about 7 years. We talked about doing this, and I think we talked about doing it, and then COVID hit, and we talked about it again, and I think finally it was a conversation between the two of us where I said, let's just stop talking about it and let's do it. None of us really had a background in podcasts, so it was a lot of researching. We started it. We use Zoom, which we transfer over to an audio file and post on Buzzsprout. So I learned how to edit. We started doing the podcast. We loved it. We started out with just Bob would use his laptop. I used my iMac. And as we got into it more and more, we got the mics and all that stuff. And I think we created a very informative podcast. If you're a Patriots fan, Bob's particular angle on that, I'll let him kind of collaborate on that as he talks about his book. We started doing the podcast. We had guests on, just some people that I know from the past, Patriot players from the Super Bowl team to just some older players. Then we did some game recaps, trying to add some content because, I think Paul, content is the key to any successful podcast. So we tried to think of something different. And then as we did that, Dave, who's a good friend of mine, was listening to the podcast, giving me good feedback. And we said, well, you know what? Why don't we, I think that's when we started the game recaps. I said, well, why don't we have you in and we'll have you be part of the game recaps. We did that. Dave has added a tremendous value to the podcast. Between the three of us, I think we've made a great team, and he took off with it, and we felt comfortable enough with each other that he remained as not just our third man in on game recaps, but now he's a permanent part of the podcast. It's going strong. I think we've built a very good sounding, very informative, a great podcast. We've had some great guests on. We just recently posted Greg Hill from the morning show, 93.7, the Greg Hill morning show. We've had some pretty impressive guests. Upton Bell, if you look at our lineup, I think you'll like it, and I'm going to turn it over to Bob to kind of explain his take that he added to the podcast. But if you're interested in the podcast, and hopefully after tonight you'll want to listen, you can download it anywhere where you can get your podcast, whether it's Apple, Google. We're on every platform, so hopefully you'll take a download. And again, Paul, thank you for having us on tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob. And Bob, why don't you elaborate on the part of the podcast that you kind of was your birth child with that?
Yes, thanks, Scott. And Paul, we go back a little bit. First things that I did after writing my first book called Untold Patriots is meet a lot of the players along the way and hear their stories. And some of the stories are pretty heart-wrenching of what they had to overcome to get to an elite level. And, one of the things that, I've been to Pearl Street Station before we started doing this podcast, and Joey Voices was a dear friend, and we used to do things together, and we did some trivia one night at the Pearl Street Station and did some book signings with him. And we met with the Patriots at different charity events. So, I had an idea of interviewing all these players and trying to figure out, all the anxiety and the stress that people are in, what kind of obstacles are people going through, and I wanted to add that angle to it. So, Scott brought in some players like Maurice Hurst and Mike Ruth in the beginning, and some of the obstacles that they came, and now we're talking to Dedrick Wise and guys that play for the team, and Jabbar Sheard and Adam Butler and Otis Smith. I mean, the list goes on, of even Trenny and Jamie Parker, some of the mental health issues out there. So a lot of what I try to get into is the mindset of people and how do they overcome and how do they surround themselves and encourage themselves to, be an authentic person. So, when we started doing this and started hooking up with some of the fans, and we did a couple, like Scott said, remotes at the Pearl Street Station, we met some fans, and you can't find bigger fans than Scott and Dave. These guys go back. Dave has a huge collection of collectibles, and Scott has been a season ticket holder for 20, 30 years almost. So I wanted to surround myself with people that were fanatics and loved the game and loved the sport and loved talking about it. So when Dave come in about 2/3 of the way in or halfway in, we're like, man, he's funny, he's engaging, he's got some great stories, he's got some great thoughts, So he's not a third man in anymore. He's part of our trio of hopefully entertaining and bringing some energy and bringing some wisdom to people that really, you can learn something from some of our podcasts. So I want to introduce Dave Usher, and we'll kind of go round and round and kind of share some more stories. But welcome to the team, Dave. You've been with us for a while, and share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, so I was born on a rainy June day back in the, as Bob said, and, I think it's, we've got into a good groove where, Scott's always got the direct sports questions and such. And then Bob was talking about how we speaks on overcoming obstacles, which I think is a real different spin, a take on the sports genre that we have that kind of differentiates us. We talk to these people and afterwards they've been like, wow, thanks. Thanks for letting me talk about that. Thanks for letting me know that I haven't been forgotten. And then also, giving some messages to people that they can go through tough times and still succeed. So I guess, then what's my role in that? I try and be a little fun with it. I did a did a TV show, sports TV show on cable, Wayne's World. Like, I'm not going to say it wasn't the fifth quarter or anything, but anyway, really enjoyed it, and I like these guys, so I think the chemistry has been great. And then again, Paul, thank you. You don't know what a compliment it is that I'll drive past Boston to go to Malden to come see you, because I'm a staunch South Shore guy. So I go up to the Wilmington Card Show, Scott's house, and in Pearl Street Station. That's it. Other than that, I'm on the South Shore, baby.
I love it. That is great. And thank you, gentlemen, for those very, very kind words. And driving up from the South Shore and having that North Shore pizza over at Pearl and not a South Shore pizza is really a true compliment. And that's super. So basically, as we are fellow podcasters and all, and I have seen how you have prepared for your podcast when you come over to Pearl Street Station. When do you start planning your podcasts for a given Sunday or Saturday?
I mean, really, it starts with there's kind of a list that I have of people that I want to talk to. And then it's just a matter of making contact with them. I mean, there's some people that I have a direct connection with that it's easy. There's other ones that are a little bit harder because you kind of have to network and resource to get through to somebody. Greg Hill was a perfect example of that. I mean, these guys know that, that it's probably the first time since we've been doing the podcast together, they had to kind of talk me down a little bit because Greg, to me,
he's got a little man crush, Paul.
Yeah, but we had Bob Lobel on, who I consider an icon. So that was a little nerve-wracking when we had Bob on, because we're all doing this for the first time, and you want to sound professional. You don't want to sound like an amateur when you have them on. And Greg was somebody that he's played a big part in Boston radio. I mean, AAF for almost 3 decades now. Then he transformed over to EEI. So to me, if you want to talk to somebody and get feedback or get somebody to put something out on social media, because podcasts, Paul, are all about getting the right guest and then having them put it on their social media platform to blow up the podcast, right? So my thing was, when we have Greg on, we got to be on point, because, we all want to sound like we know what we're doing. I would say, and it's funny, me and Dave were talking about this tonight, we don't really plan a podcast. And I think when you listen to our podcast, I think you're going to see that it's a very free-flowing conversation, but it's not like we sit down and we say, okay, well, we're going to talk about this. We did a little bit with Greg, but, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this, and this is how it's structured. It's basically I count down from 3 to 1. It starts rolling, and
I think that's true, because we want the naturalness of it, but that's not to say we don't do our research and planning ahead of time. I think we do as much lead time as we have. I think we all have a significant amount of research. We might do it different ways, but speaking for myself, I've usually got 3 pages of notes and some ideas of questions ahead of time, and then it all depends on how it flows, because as Scott and I talking earlier, each guest's a little different. Each guest has a little bit of a different personality. Each guest has maybe more obstacles that they overcame than others, so it's less prevalent in some of the podcasts. Some of them, some of the folks that have their own formats where they speak, or someone like a Greg Hill that speaks all the time. It's much easier to talk to someone like that that's free-flowing. As we've done it more, I think we adjust to it. So yeah, as it's, I don't want to say it's off the cuff, because we're definitely prepared and we want to make it very professional, but it's not preset.
Yeah, I think to Dave's point, the research is done on all our part. Bob doesn't have to do research because he already has it all in his head. He's the stat man. But what I told Dave, what I do is I have these big Post-it notes that are lined paper. So what I do is I fill them out with the stuff that I want to touch on. And I think we all do the same thing. We'll cross something off if somebody else hits on it. But I have that right in front of me. So when I'm looking at the screen, you can't tell that I'm really looking at my notes. So I have them like kind of, I post them to the bottom of the screen, and I'm kind of like reading them as I'm going through the podcast in case I forget everything. I guess I should say what I meant by that is once we start the podcast, there's no like order of anything. It's just like, I start, introduce the guest, and I spin it around, and then we just kind of all have that conversation. So, and I think that kind of makes for I think that's another thing that makes our podcast, besides the overcoming obstacles, I think that's another difference with our podcast. I think if you listen to it, hopefully we've had a lot of people on the radio, and if you listen to their show, whether it's, Greg Hill or whether it's Zolak and Bertrand, you can tell the chemistry, and it comes through on the TV or the radio. And that's kind of, if I had a vision for the podcast, that's what it would be. If you listen to the podcast, you're going to hear three guys that have a symmetry. As a fan, it's somebody, if it's your favorite player, you're enjoying the podcast and you're hearing a story that you wouldn't have heard other than from the player themselves. And then you walk away with something, if you're depressed or if you have some sort of problem, you walk away with something that can help you with that. I mean, what I like to do is I'll ask the guest before we start the podcast, listen, you had a problem with A, B, or C. If I ask you, is it something that you're willing to talk about? Because you never want to blindside somebody. So if they say, hey, no, I don't want to talk, then I won't go there. And if they say, yeah, I just say to them, you never know that one life that you can touch by talking about it. And if they were a fan of us, that could help somebody either stop drinking or whatever the problem is.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, Scott has mentioned, and Dave, chances are we've met some of these guys before. Scott has relationships. He's done autograph shows with them. I've interviewed them and met a lot of them. A lot of them that are either doing podcasts like Tony Collins is on a lot of different podcasts. Irving Fryer has his own podcast. Upton Bell and Bob LaBelle. Some of these guys that are in the media, they kind of know how to share a story and get to the point quickly. And then some of them, when they really get into, we had Elgin Davis on, and we had a general idea of what his story was, but when they start going on and they really get into some of the traumas that they had to overcome, I mean, we might ask a question and have a follow-up question to go with that, but some of these guys, they're just laying it out there. They're so happy just to kind of share their story and really get into it. And, some of them have had practice communicating. They've written books about it, or they're kind of sharing, or they're doing stuff in the church or the community. So our research is a little bit of what is their message and what do they want to share in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. So we have Steve Nelson and guys like that were coaches after their career or were in the media. So we're trying to really bring out the best in them and get to the point. And, if someone's listening and saying, geez, all right, show up. We had Tully Batacan is show up. And it was like, what does that mean? Well, show up when you're in a meeting, when you're doing something, when you're engaged. Be there mentally, be there physically, be there spiritually, just be there. When you're talking to your wife or when you're talking to your parents or you're talking to a kid or just, that message right there was just show up. Hopefully that resonates with a lot of different people in a lot of different situations. So we try to find at the end of it, we do a little wrap up and a little quote or something like that the theme of this interview was whatever it was, a little bit of wisdom that you picked up from Belichick or a teammate or something about their vision or their culture or their encouragement or their grandmother or anything like that kind of elevates them to the next level. So there's a lot of stuff, and it's really interesting when we get three different perspectives of kind of asking different questions to bring some of that stuff out. And these guys, they're really sharing their heart and soul. A lot of these guys are really appreciative that we can bring stuff out and share some of the stuff with the CTE, like Rick Sanford talked about, or Garen Varus and things like that. There's some stories that people just don't know about, and that was part of what we tried to do, is untold stories that maybe might help you.
Yep, and I think to Dave's point, too, we happen to be talking on the phone before we got on here, and, you've been doing it now, Paul, too, so I think it's funny because after we had Elgin Davis on, I think all four of us, for the first time, I think, it was so powerful, it affected all of us. Like, after it was
really
over,
did.
like, we really didn't say anything. We were like, and then everybody, you'll have people that have high energy. Another episode that we'll be putting out pretty soon is Hardy from 98.5, the Zolak and Bertrand show. And he was, from beginning to end, pure adrenaline. I mean, it was like 100% high energy. We've had other guests like that, and then some guests are just, very monotone. There's some guests that you're looking at the time, and it's like, I don't want to say it's dragging, but you're saying to myself, okay, we gotta get a half hour's worth or 45 minutes worth. And then there's other ones. Bob will tell you, we did Upton Bell, and we probably could have had a 7-hour podcast. I mean, he just literally
85.
So, and I was trying to get him off, and he just kept talking and talking. We had to turn it into a 3-part podcast. So there's varying degrees of, the people that you have on. how fluid the conversation is, like how the energy is. So like I said, Elgin Davis, it was after listening to his story, we were just like, we had nothing to say after because it touched all of us. Hardy was just, it was laughs. It was talking about music. Dave brought out the music part, and he talked about the problem that he had with alcoholism. It's been a very uplifting thing to be doing. I always wanted to be in radio, and this is kind of like my way to kind of say that I'm doing something that I love and I enjoy it, and I enjoy doing it with two of my best friends. Dave, I don't know what you have to add to all that, but
yeah, no, I'll echo the Elgin Davis. If folks are just hearing about us for the first time at Untold Patriots Stories podcast, Elgin Davis you'll see it, and it's an hour. Usually we try and keep them to about 30, 40 minutes, but we didn't want to break this one up into a part 1 and 2 just because it was so powerful. And most fans are probably saying, who's Elgin Davis? Bob's probably one of the more knowledgeable Pats fans there is. And I think at first he's like, oh, do we want him on? What did he do? Because he only played like 7 or 8 games with the Patriots because of injuries. But his story was so compelling. And, again, I think that's the kind of things we bring out. And you know what? It just dawned on me, Paul, what you're doing here. You're trying to get Untold Patriot Stories about Untold Patriot Stories. So I see. Yes. I'm on to you now. I know what you're doing. So.
And Dave, I just want to add something just real quick to what you said, because I was talking to Wiggy, and I don't remember if you were there, Dave, but we were talking about the podcast, and I've had some kind words said to me by players and by some media people that it's a very good podcast, and we were saying, I don't know, we were talking about players. It was either him or Zolak, I can't remember which one, but we were talking about the podcast, and he goes, Scott, listen, remember one thing. He goes, it doesn't matter who you have on, whether they played for 10 years or 5 years or a year. Doesn't matter if they won a Super Bowl. Doesn't matter if they won an award. He goes, they could play 3 games. He goes, what you got to remember is, what's the story? He said the story is what's important. It's not how long they played. Did they win Super Bowls? He goes, you could have somebody that played a year, but they might have the most powerful story. And that's something that kind of, when they said that, it kind of hit home. And I was like, yeah, you know what? You're right. And I think if anything, because we have so if you look at our episode list, we have a pretty strong lineup. It doesn't necessarily have to be that A-lister or that superstar. I mean, it's really what the story is that athlete has to tell.
I do remember that. That was Wiggy. And I think he went on to say, he could be from East Boston. He could be a local kid. That guy.
He started the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, we
joke because he's such a good guy.
Training on that talked about mental health, and that's her forte, is that she's had depression issues, and she came from another state, and she came to Boston. What's she gonna do? She had a relationship that she broke off, and she's like, I got to start all over as a female sportscaster in Boston. How am I gonna do this? And how do I, get myself together? And some of the issues of just going to the beach or praying or surrounding herself with her environment and getting her self-talk into her mind. And now she's married, she's happy, she's on TV, she's doing her thing, her passion, her life's dream. But she had to go through some stuff to get there. And for her to kind of just get into that for 5 minutes, and we just let her go. And she's like, it's out there, and we have to deal with it and be aware of that there's depression and there's anxiety and there's stress, and to have a female perspective come in and to tell her story. I mean, like, she does, she didn't play football, she didn't coach football, it's nothing, but she had a story, and we had to bring it out, and she was glad to do it, and chances are we'll have her on again because she was riveting as well. She was another one similar to Elgin Davis. Not as powerful, but still effective, of reaching out to people and saying, I've had coaches and people in not so much sports, but people that do individual coaching and, and teaching and tutoring and that kind of stuff. I know a woman down in Florida, and she listened to that and she says, wow, parents need to hear this, females need to hear this, her story, because she's inspiring other females to kind of not be alone and not just kind of be isolated. Surround yourself with people that are going to encourage and support and uplift you and elevate you to where you really should be. So it's amazing what kind of stories and what feedback we're getting from fans out there.
And I think if you're a fan, I mean, you could be a fan of the player, you could be a fan of the media people that we've had on. We've had like Jerry Thornton on that, he worked at a courthouse and gave up everything he was doing, told his wife, listen, I'm going to leave my job at the courthouse and I'm going to take a chance and go on sports radio. And he said, I thought she'd tell me I was crazy, but, she said, do it, do what you need to do. So there's stories like that. But I think the thing we all do as fans is we'll look at somebody on TV, whether it's our favorite athlete or favorite media person, and we say to ourselves, wow, they're lucky, they're doing this, they're doing that. And I don't think people realize that, that they're people like me and you, and everybody has problems and all that. And when you see, and again, whether or not somebody played a year or not, they still had a long journey to make that first NFL start, whether they played for a year or two or whatever. They have a story to tell, and like I said, they're human just like the rest of us. I mean, some of the stuff that they went through is pretty powerful, and they made it to the top of their profession, no matter how long or short it was. They made that journey, and they overcame things and made it. So I think that's very unique. We ask them, give us one thing that nobody knows, because it is Untold Patriots Stories. So we'll throw that in there and say, what's one thing that you can tell us that unless it came from your mouth, nobody would know. Because I know I started doing autograph shows and stuff and spending time with people, whether it was riding in the car or a signing, like that's the biggest thing that I always enjoyed, was hearing that Belichick story or hearing that practice story or a game story. I'll share one of those by the end of the podcast.
Yeah, look, can I share one now?
Yeah.
So something that Scott and I had the good fortune to be able to do was, about a year ago, we were able to bring in all 5 running backs from the Super Bowl 36 team. And we went out to dinner with them, just Scott and I and one other gentleman. And we kind of were flies on the wall. And it was like they were back in their running back room and telling stories. And not that they weren't paying attention to us, but I think Scott and I were just listening and just had big smiles on our faces as they were just being so real. And it was great to watch and to hear their stories and ask our input every once in a while, or relate why this was important. And that was a real cool experience.
Why don't you tell him was it Kevin Falk? What did he say to you when we were leaving? Because remember, we had I had the conversation with you guys before. I said, let's just let them do their thing. Let's just kind of blend in. But didn't Kevin Falk pull you aside and say something to you? Wasn't it Kevin?
Yeah. I mean, he was just, he was like, this is great. I get to talk to these guys. But the funny part was before.
But he said,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
He said, thank you for letting us do our thing.
Yeah, no, he was out. He was very sincere and hadn't met him too much before. And I think he's kind of a driven guy and focused. So sometimes you see him and he's focused on other things. And that night, it just was such a real side of him. But one of the funniest thing was Scott, once Brady left, he didn't have any use for Brady anymore. So he wanted to kind of get the feel for these guys that played with Brady. Like, yeah, he's missed a big shot now, and he's too big for everybody. And that's why I couldn't think of it for a minute. Scott, is Kevin Falk looked him right in his face and said, Tom's my friend. He's not like that. Stop it. And so I used to try and say that to Scott. Cut it out. That's Tom Brady. Can't talk about him like that. Now, anytime he brings it up, I go, hey, Kevin Falk said it. You got to listen to Kevin.
So I don't want to give away too many of the stories because I want everybody to listen to the podcast. But we'll kind of tease some stuff to hopefully get them interested. One of the best stories that I'll always remember, if you listen to Ken Walter's podcast, I've known Ken for probably 5-6 years. And he is, out of all the Patriots that I've met, he is the biggest storyteller and has the most stories of anybody. Some I could share, some I can't share. But the one I can share is actually on our podcast. So I think Dave knows what I'm talking about, and I think, Bob, you do too. But he told me a story about Rodney Harrison. So Rodney Harrison, when he played for San Diego, was a big hitter. Ken's a punter, which after getting to know Ken, I didn't realize that, punters got beat up pretty bad in those days, and they, the rules allowed it. So he said it was a game, and he was coming up the sidelines after he punted the ball, and he goes, Scott, all of a sudden, he goes, I got hit so hard, my helmet went flying, my chin strap fell off, I'm on the sideline, I was out of it. Rodney Harrison comes over, and he gets right over me and says, that's the best hit I ever hit anybody in the NFL. And so now he says, I'm on the sideline. He goes, Scott, I'm hurting. And he goes, and I'm trying to get up, and I'm walking over to the sideline, and Belichick's telling me, suck it up and get over here, right? So he says, I go over there. Belichick doesn't even look at me. He goes, I'm walking back. So now he says, fast forward to however many years it was, maybe 1 or 2 years, whatever it was. And he goes, I'm in the locker room, and Rodney Harrison walks in. He says, I look up, and I go, what the hell? I'm not going to say what he said, but he goes, what the hell are you doing here? He goes, I came to talk to Coach Belichick. Before I go upstairs, I want to tell you, that's still the best hit I ever played. So he goes upstairs. Ken's still in the locker room. So whatever time passes, Rodney comes downstairs, and he goes, "Hey, how'd it go?" And he goes, "Well, I'm your teammate now." He goes, "Hey, so what happened up there?" He goes, "Belichick brought me upstairs, He goes, "So we're sitting, Bill's at his desk, or he's sitting at his desk, Rodney's sitting on the other side." And he goes, "You know what, Rodney?" He goes, "I'll tell you this." And this kind of loses its luster nowadays with everything going on, but he says, "I'm going to tell you this, Rodney." He goes, "You can definitely get more money from another team." He goes, "That I can guarantee you." He goes, "But there's one thing you can't get." So he looks over to his right, opens his drawer, takes his hand. Now you got to imagine his whole hand going into the drawer, going to the back, pulling everything forward. He takes his other hand, cups his hand, and on the table, he puts down all the rings. He goes, "You might get more money, but you won't get one of these." And Rodney Harrison said that's all I needed to hear.
Wow.
And he was right.
And then he came here and won a couple Super Bowls with us. Yep.
Wow. And the rest, as they say, is history, right?
Yep. And that's the kind of stuff, besides overcoming obstacles, those are the kind of stories you'll hear on our podcast straight from the player's mouth. And like I said, that's one that always stuck with me. And that's a story I tell over and over again. I want to say it's X-rated, it's more R-rated, but for the R-rated story, you got to go to the podcast. So you'll find it funny.
Just to backtrack a bit, Dave, I do resemble that remark about the Untold Patriot Stories, about this podcast being about Untold Patriot Stories, and I am just like blown away with some of these great stories, and I thank you for sharing all these stories. And you are right, this podcasting platform is really something that I really am enjoying, and I'm having a lot of fun doing this, and as I equate what I call time, T-I-M-E, things I must experience. There is so much passage of time with all of the guests who you have on. And that passage of time is things I must experience, whether they experienced it in college or the NFL, for the Patriots, in life, with whatever issues that they may have met or encountered along the way. We get to hear that human element. And I think what you're really bringing out, and I've listened to many of your podcasts thus far, I have heard such great stories. I was blown away with Kevin Falk's story. I think it was a 2 or 3 part podcast, and it was just unbelievable. And Garen Veris, and just so many great stories that people can, in fact, feel really great when after they hear that podcast, and then they end up sharing it with their friends, and they say, "You got to hear this one. You got to hear this podcast." So really, I applaud you for all the great things you're doing.
Appreciate it.
Really,
I just want to correct you with one thing, though. We haven't had Kevin on yet. We will, but we might be confused. There,
Maybe
we
it's
do
Tony
have a couple
Collins.
of 3 parts. So you confused them.
Tony Collins, yeah,
Tony-
okay, right. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Tony Collins was
I stand
2-parter.
corrected.
Yeah.
Right, I stand corrected.
Yep. I just wanted to make sure people didn't go looking for the Kevin Fox.
Right, thank you. No, so there's there's using my memory. I thought I was doing a Facebook Live, like in the middle of just thinking on my feet and having people there. And you've actually been on a Facebook Live with me when we had that Bruins watch party. And I have been doing a lot of those from the restaurant, and that's a totally different element. That's in the moment, and just putting up with all the noise behind me. But right now we're in a very tight studio. We all have headphones or earbuds on, and we're in a controlled environment. But those Facebook Lives, and I have seen you at the restaurant when you have been doing a Facebook Live. So what's that like, just to switch subjects a bit from a podcast to a Facebook Live?
Well, I we've done a couple, and I've seen a lot of yours. You and Russo on the road do Facebook Live, and I try to catch as many as I can. And it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of vulnerability, because you really don't know what's going to happen. Someone drops a tray in the background, or someone walks in, and when we've done a couple of jobs, we've had people come on just from the bar, and hey, Matt, tell us what's going on, and so it's exciting, and it's live, and you can see the feedback that you're getting from the people that are watching too, which is amazing. And we've done a couple of Facebook Lives, and we've got people from England and Germany that kind of, "Hey, Bob, how you doing?" Or Paul, or Scott or Dave or whatever, and they're listening and watching us on Facebook, because we have a Facebook group as well, Untold Patriots Stories Facebook group. So like you say, you make a mistake, you just say, hey, well, we're live, and it's kind of like live TV. It's exciting, but it's challenging, and you want to be focused and you want to be quick too. But the feedback that you're getting, and you have no idea who's watching you and what kind of joy you're bringing, and you get a lot of feedback. Hey, thanks, Paul. This was great, and you've had Russo and you've some of the comedians and Joey Voices has done a couple of promos for us, and Wiggy's done a couple. We're hoping to do more of that, and we're excited to get back to Pearl Street Station and do some more of that throughout the year as well. So thanks for sponsoring us and thanks for supporting us that way.
Yeah, Paul.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'll say. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I was just going to say, Paul. It was a great question, but also just specifically for that, for some of our on-site things, and this may be what Scott was going to say is we've actually purchased equipment to go live there now. Have people on.
Nice.
I don't know the tech part of it, but we got some nice equipment so that when we're there, we can actually do it with the professional microphones and all that. Not that Facebook's not wonderful in its own right. Ramp up the quality a little bit for when we're there live.
Yep. Dave, you were reading my mind. So the only thing I would add to that is I can remember one of the first times that, you started doing the Facebook Live and you really started getting into it. It's an adrenaline rush when you're doing it. Me and Dave had the opportunity to do interviews at a card show a couple weeks ago, and it was kind of like a radio station doing a live remote. And we got to, whoever was an autograph guest came over and talked to us for a little bit. But we've gotten a banner. If you can see behind me, we had a poster board made, and it has a QR code that you can scan, and it'll take you right to the podcast. So we've kind of very quickly raised our professionalism and our equipment. So like I said, it's called the Tascam, and it's basically like a soundboard that we set up. We have 4 mics so that we can have somebody come over. You can also kind of filter out the background noise. So when we do that, it will be, very professional looking. We're having shirts made and all that kind of stuff. So we're legit. And I think that the podcast is gaining momentum. And we just need to get more people to take a listen, share it with fellow Pats fans. And like I said, Untold Patriots Stories, and you can find us on any platform where you download your podcasts. Follow us, give us a like or some feedback. But, we've enjoyed it. I'm glad that me and Bob finally started it and brought Dave in, and we're all having a lot of fun with it. It's just when you're doing something and you like it, it's not work. So we just love doing it, and I think that I'm looking forward to. We're looking at probably getting down there the week after the draft and maybe doing something down at Pearl Street Station with our equipment now and everything. And, look forward to doing a lot of events there next year. But, yeah, and it was fun seeing you kind of catch the bug because I think we kind of saw it in the beginning, right?
Really, you really did, and I thank you for that. You inspired me. You really have. So there's Inspire, Aspire, and Perspire. It's really a lot of work just to plan this, just to make it happen, and you have really inspired me to keep on going. And in an inspiring way, I really do encourage our listeners out on the platform, all of our subscribers, to really just look at this podcasting platform. And it's really great. And the cross-pollination and sharing our ideas, sharing our podcasts, our followers, our subscribers, and all is really just mind-boggling and all. And when we started at the top of the program, before we went live, we said, probably be about 30, 40 minutes. I think we're at 45 minutes right now, and we haven't even, we could go on and on for days. So
there's always another podcast, Paul, right?
Yes, indeed. Hashtag indeed, without a doubt.
Untold Patriots Stories number 2.
Absolutely. And then number 3 and so on and so forth. But Scott, do you have any quick stories, any teasers, whatever?
I'll tell you what, Bob, you go first. Let me think. I want to try to think of a good one. So, Bob, you go first, then Dave, and then I'll finish it out.
So one of the things that you talked about, Paul, is have aspirations and visions, and what Scott and I. It took us a while, but we just decided to just do it. So I mean, that's one of the things that we try to say is that if you're thinking about it, just jump in. I mean, we had no idea what we were doing, and we've improved substantially just from the first show with equipment and sound and the way we kind of interact and kind of go through this. But, we had a guy that, Lou Imbriano, he said, just go do it. Just get out there and do it. Just try it. And then, change and adapt and improve and just do something. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I've seen from this is that Dave just jumped right in. He said, "Hey, you guys are having fun. I want to be part of this. Come on in, jump in the pool. Let's go." And then we saw you, Paul, and Paul's like, "Man, you guys are having so much fun. Paul, just go do it. Okay, I'm ready. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's go." We had no idea. And you had no idea.
Then the next time at Pearl Street Station, it's like, come on, let's do a Facebook Live. Come on, let's go.
Right,
Just
exactly.
do it. Just try it. What do you got to lose? I mean, just have fun doing it. And people will see the energy. They'll see the enthusiasm. They'll see the passion and the law of attraction. And, Paul and I, we've known each other, and every time we've been together, it's just been powerful. I mean, it's just, we feel of each other. We get to know each other, and we both feel off the passion. And the same thing with Scott and Dave and the people that we have on, that they are so excited just to share their story, to say, Maurice Hurst, wow, I'm glad you guys remember me. I haven't played in 25 years. Yeah, we remember you. Make a play, go out there and do it, and just to hear, them sharing a little bit of something that happened a long time ago, or something like Dietrich Wise that happened last year, or something, or there's something he had a nice little poem that he shared. So you got to check his story out about the poem that he shares, that he reads and thinks about every day. So there's a lot of teasers, but, just go do.
Yes. I mean, originally we were going to be the Just Do It podcast, but then Nike jumped in. But no, no, it was, always going to be a Patriots type of theme. I echo what the guys have been saying, but part of the enjoyment for me is, like Scott said, it's fun to do this. And I do like doing the research, and I like finding some of the obscure things, and a couple of teasers, I guess, if you will. Like, you mentioned the Garen Veris episode, one of our more recent ones. He had a mention on Family Guy. So we talked to what his thoughts about that. So, not so much football related, even though it was about Tecmo Bowl football. So Scott actually was able to sleuth that Jamie Parker, who was one, she wrote an episode for Seinfeld. So some of these things that are just, while we're talking about Patriot stories, we're learning some fun anecdotes, or, just the other sides of people. And she's, a wonderful person, great personality, but I don't know that I would have thought she would have written a Seinfeld episode. So that was a cool thing to learn. So I'm enjoying it thoroughly. I appreciate you guys bringing me in. I mean, I'm not going to say the numbers didn't go up when I got on, but still.
No, I'm going to tell you again. Bob was the one for the big jump in the numbers. I'm going to give him credit for that, because Woburn's the number one city in our podcast. So there's somebody that lives in Woburn, so we can't take credit for that. Bob has to get all the
brought in
credit
4
for
from Poland, so.
Yeah. So I think for me, I mean, it would be a couple things. It would be one of the things, and anybody that knows me knows, like I said, I wanted to get into radio. I'm 53, and it's kind of late in the game now, but we had somebody, and I don't know if it was on a podcast or whatever, and I had said that, and they said, "Well, Scott, you're doing it," and I was like, "You're right. You said you wanted to do it, now you're doing it," and they said, in order for something to happen, there needs to be a beginning, and you're doing that right now. You're doing the podcast, so I think. The whole thing about, Bob saying, just do it. Yeah, I mean, just do it,
That was Sarge.
And it was Sarge, you're right. Like I said, it's been fun for me. If I was smart like Bob, I would have taken all the windshield time I had with all those players, had a voice recorder, and wrote a book. But I'm too old to remember all those stories, so I guess we'll just do this. And I think the other thing is from the players, and a lot of the times what we have for feedback is, thank you for having me on. Because these guys, a lot of them, the older players feel forgotten, and when you hear some of them start to talk about stuff that meant a lot to them, whether it be family, whether we try to talk about, there's certain things we try to cover. So we try to cover, where they grew up, high school, college, who was a mentor to them, family or whatever. We try to cover all that stuff, what made him successful. But I think the biggest thing is that it's therapeutic for the players to be talking about this stuff. I think sometimes it kind of talked about their message and how it could save a life or help somebody go through something that they're going through. And I think in a lot of ways, I think we're helping some of those older players. And I think one of the players said, and Dave, you have a good memory for this stuff, but somebody said, thank you for having this platform for talking to all of us older players, and have us on and talking about it. It means a lot to them. They think they're forgotten, and when they realize they're not, and one of the things I always say is, they say to me, "Oh, you want me on the podcast," or whatever, and I'm like, "Listen, somewhere in Massachusetts or around the world, there's somebody that is a fan of yours, and you were the one that they had a poster of, they bought a jersey of, they bought a T-shirt of, or they just bought a Patriots poster and they wanted you to sign it. There's one person out there that you mean a lot to. Whether it's at a card show or an autograph signing, they'll meet that one person and they're blown away. Like Maurice Hurst had somebody bring a picture from when he was playing. It was a friend of his or something. You guys remember this?
Yeah. It was like 20 years previous. And he said, when I'll see you again, I'll get you to sign it. And the guy brought the photo 20 years later, fulfilled his promise. And Maurice stopped the autograph show, brought his wife over. They both looked at the, it was a cool moment.
And I think he asked for one of the pitches or something. But I mean, like, let's be honest. I mean, with everything going on today with the CTE and stuff, I mean, they gave, I don't want to sound dramatic, but they kind of gave their life away to football, because now they're paying for it, whether it's CTE or whether it's it's an injury, a bad back, a bad knee, a bad hip, or whatever. I mean, they gave up a lot for that, and like I said, they just want to be remembered. So I just hope that anybody that's a Pats fan or a Pats fan and is going through stuff, take the time to listen, like our podcast. I think once you do start to listen, I think you'll want to listen to more. And we have a big library of guests now. We're approaching 50 episodes. It's hard to believe. So we're getting up there, and we're getting up there quick. And hopefully there's a little bit of something for everybody in there that they can take something from. And if it's, one of their favorite players or whatever. And again, Untold Patriots Stories, any platform that you download, you can download a podcast, and you can go to our Facebook page, Untold Patriots Stories, and give us feedback, or if there's somebody that you want us to try to get. Can't say that we can get everybody, but we've been pretty successful so far. I mean, we've only had one person that declined to come on for reasons that they had issues with the team or whatever, but we've had pretty good success.
And we're not going to say who it was, but if you heard who it was, you'd understand why.
But give us recommendations, give us feedback, or anybody that you want on. And Paul, again, I'll tell you, now this isn't Untold Patriots Stories, but I'm going to give you a plug. I had met you doing charity auctions and stuff like that. But I think our first conversation where we were just kind of talking about life, I would say, I was totally blown away by what you've accomplished in your life and some of the things you've done. Like, I mean, it was an untold Paul story. How's that? Okay.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, you were just listing stuff and you're like, yeah, I did this, I did that. And I was like, holy crap. I mean, you've done a lot of stuff and accomplished a lot, so you should be proud of yourself. And I'm glad to call you a friend now, and somebody that we look forward to spending more time with. And I'm glad you're having fun, and I'm glad your podcast is kicking off. And I think this is a great relationship. I'm glad our paths crossed, and that I can now call you a friend. And continued success.
Ditto, ditto, ditto. Really, seriously, and thank you very much, Scott. And as I said earlier, it really is a great passage of time, things I must experience, and we've all had such great journeys, and we just hope that the journeys just continue for a long, long time. TIME, things I must experience, and I look forward to experiencing many more great podcasts and great experiences of friendship with you fine gentlemen. Just two quick observations, though. I really will say that we all have faces for radio. I think.
Come on now.
No. I'm joking.
His face is pretty good.
I know, really. You look marvelous.
There you go. Friend of
You
ours.
look marvelous. And lastly, when I think about what great human beings you are, you're not only great human beings, but you're great human doings. And when we look at a being and doing, what we're all doing is just doing what our hearts and what our minds want to do. And I applaud each of you for just jumping into the water, not getting those toes wet, taking the plunge. And for our listeners out there, and for anyone in life, I really think it's so important for us to do it. And there's that Nike commercial, there's that whoosh, you basically just have to do it. So we are human doings. We had Heidegger, the philosopher, who said Dasein, beings there. Well, really what we're doing's there. And what we're doing is really great work that has such a sense of permanency and permanence and making it happen in life. So our listeners, our subscribers could really just hear some great stories. I look forward to more Untold Patriot Stories down the road. Looking forward for anyone who wants to come down to Pearl Street Station restaurant and hear the podcasts during a game, or maybe after the draft period, after the draft. We'll see what's going on. But really, I just encourage all of our subscribers to just tune in to Untold Patriot Stories and hit every one of those almost 50 episodes. And gentlemen, Scott, Bob, Dave, thank you for being part of this. And this has just been tremendous, and look forward to many more years of friendship.
All right, Paul, thanks a lot,
I just
buddy.
want to
Thanks for
throw
having
one
us
thing
on.
out there. So one of the things that I try to do is people are trying to survive, and I'm trying to get them to thrive. And I think one of the things about thriving is doing what you're doing, pondering, thinking, being creative, being innovative. And in order to be able to ponder, you got to be at peace. You got to have a vision of what message are you trying to get to people. You're serving someone else. You're trying to bring a message. You're trying to make this life a better place and enjoy the journey. So I applaud that word. Pondering is Paul Ponder's podcast is a genius idea. I love it. And I think we got to do more of that. We got to do more pondering, more thinking, but in a positive way, in an encouraging way, in a supportive way. So I want to give kudos to that. I love what you're doing with that. And you've got some great stories and some great experiences. And I love your wisdom. So we're supporting you 1,000% too. So, welcome to the podcasting world, and you're doing a great job. So I love all the stuff you're doing, and keep that up. Keep it on.
Well, thank you for that. And, the 5 Ps, poor planning prevents proper performance. We won't add that 6th P. It's a G-rated podcast here. But anyways, poor planning prevents proper performance. And really, it's just something that we just keep on keeping on and just doing and all. So, again, gentlemen, thank you so much. And again, tune in, log in to Untold Patriot Stories. Take a look at Bob's book, The Patriots. What's the name of the book,
Total
Bob?
Patriots, come out by Triumph Books. And then the second one is Relive Patriots History. They're both on Amazon. So Total Patriots, 50-year history. And then Relive Patriots History is a 60-plus year history of the team. Both on Amazon and been sold worldwide. So thanks for that.
When's the hat trick going to happen?
Yeah, we got an update, another one. And the reason the second book came out is just to get the stats into the Patriots all-time roster display that's on the 3rd floor of the Patriots Hall of Fame. So you can see some of my book at the Patriots Hall of Fame and in a computer display. So that's pretty
And if
cool.
you bring them down to the Pearl Street Station, one of our live events, Bob will sign them for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Without a doubt. And I'm going to use a word that really a lot of people just don't use anymore, and that's encyclopedia. And what you created was just an encyclopedia of just so many great Patriot players of yesteryear. And congratulations on that.
Thank you very much,
Bob. Really, seriously. And Scott and Dave, thank you again. And everyone out there in platform podcast land, we look forward to hearing you again, seeing you again, and keep on rating, reviewing, subscribing. Pod Pro Entertainment, Techie Chalonzo, getting ready to close us down in the studio. Thank you so much for doing a great job, as you always do, with Pod Pro Entertainment. We'll see you on the other end. And everyone, good night. Have a super rest of your evening, your day, whenever you're tuning in. And God bless. Hashtag Indeed. I trust that you have enjoyed Hashtag Paul Ponders. Again, my name is Paul Solano of PS&All Marketing Group, and I may be reached via email at paul@paulponders.com to do some more pondering. Many thanks to my longtime collaborative friend and associate, Chalonzo Amos of Pod Pro Entertainment, in bringing you our fun, exciting, and informative podcasts. You rock, Techie Chalonzo. With PS&All Marketing Group, I created a side gig to connect you and get things done. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me at paul@paulponders.com with any questions. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Paul Ponders. Follow us on Twitter at Paul Ponders Pod. Follow us on Instagram at Paul Ponders Podcast. Thank you again for listening to Paul Ponders, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our website, paulponders.com, or wherever you stream your podcasts. Subscribe, stream, rate, and review our shows. Your ratings and reviews help our show reach new audiences. Produced by PodPro Entertainment. Paul Ponders lives within a network of podcasts located at podproentertainment.com. The new radio. Until we meet again, my friend, stay well. Indeed.